Thank you all for being here this morning. Nice weather. We are going to talk about a couple things here in a second that I know folks will be interested in. One of those being the fact that a strong majority of Oklahomans strongly believe that public school teachers in this state need and deserve and should get as quickly as possible a pay raise. We'll be talking here in a few minutes about some ways to get that done, because that's obviously a priority we share as well. We'll also talk about how a lot of folks around the state would also not prefer, if they could help it, to pay the highest sales tax burden of any state in the country. But in particular, the reason we're here at this spot today is earlier this morning, as you know, we filed a challenge with the Oklahoma Supreme Court of the constitutionality of Initiative Petition 403, or as most folks refer to it, the penny sales tax increase proposal that's being promoted by David Boren, the president of the University of Oklahoma. We are challenging it on the grounds of violating the single subject rule in Article 24, is that right? Article 24. Article 24, Section 1 of the state's constitution, which strongly encourages for both constitutional changes and statutory changes to limit each to one subject. For instance, the lottery back in 2004 had multiple components to doing that. It was all still the lottery, but there were multiple components, and so it was actually done in 2 ballot measures, in part to avoid that pickle. We feel quite strongly that there are 4 obvious subjects in the petition that when you lump them all together, doesn't seem to pass the test of not violating the single subject rule. So what are those? And the briefs, obviously, that most of you have in your hands will have more details. The first is obviously the $5,000 teacher pay raise. That's the one that everybody's behind, everybody likes, everybody supports, everybody thinks needs to happen, and does need to happen. But the concept of log rolling is frowned upon because it usually involves taking something that people like and support and think would be a good thing and lumping it together with stuff that on its own they might not feel as strongly in favor of. And so what are those 3 other things? Well, one of them is the fact that however much money, should the Boren sales tax increase be adopted, however much money it brings in, 40% of that money will not go to teacher pay raises. It will go to other stuff, some of which is in common education, some of which is not, some of which is in higher education and career tech, which are dealt with in totally different sections of the Constitution. 40% of the money this brings in will not go to teacher pay. And I know President Boren and other supporters haven't tried to gloss over that fact, but I'm not sure that enough people around the state understand that. And so we want to make sure that they do. I know 60% of the money still goes to teacher pay raises, but 40% is still a lot. For instance, a few years ago, Brad Henry was elected governor with, I think, 43% of the vote. Not a whole lot different, but it was enough to be elected governor. It's a significant number, 40%. Not going to go to teacher pay. It's going to go to other stuff. So there's the second subject. The third subject is the fact of the tax increase itself. A significant change to Oklahoma's tax structure would be a 22% increase of the state sales tax rate. And when you combine it with city and county level taxes across the state, would give Oklahoma the highest average combined total state and local sales tax burden of any state in the country, higher too than the District of Columbia. The only major cities in the U.S. that would have higher sales tax burdens than Tulsa and Oklahoma City after that would be Chicago and Seattle. So there's the third subject. The fourth subject is what a lot of folks, I think particularly over in that building, have been paying attention to, and that is a fairly dramatic restructuring of the state government's appropriations process. Pretty much for the entirety of statehood, the power of the purse has rested with the legislature, which is the body most directly accountable day to day to the citizens, to the voters, to the taxpayers, to the families of Oklahoma. But what this petition does is flip that on its head. The Board of Equalization would now be the ultimate authority and final decision maker on issues of state government appropriations from the General Revenue Fund. It's just a simple fact is the way the petition is currently constructed. We have filed this challenge not because we think teachers shouldn't get a pay raise. We do think teachers should get a pay raise. We're going to talk in a second about an alternative proposal to do that. I mean, it wouldn't be cool for us to come in here and say this plan is no good, end of discussion. We need to offer something as well. But when we're putting something together, we need to make sure it's constitutional. We have a U.S. Constitution and a state constitution for very clear reasons. To reinforce the rule of law, to define the relationship between Oklahomans and their state and federal governments, and what's in bounds and what's out of bounds. And so that's why we're filing this petition. Again, we feel there are 4 subjects that clearly stand out, which would mean it would violate the single subject rule in the state's constitution. You have a couple other items here. The press release lays out some of those particulars. If you don't have the full legal documents, I know some of you do, but we can email those to you after the fact. We'll also post them on our website later today at ocpaimpact.com. You also have, though, hopefully, and if you don't, please ask us after the fact and we'll get you one of these. This item here, which is basically a rundown of how it is very, very possible to give every teacher in the state, there are about 42,000 teachers in the state, give them each a $5,000 pay raise. And, I mean, the other aspect of all this, too, is the teacher shortage crisis. There's a teacher pay concern, but there's also a teacher shortage concern that folks have across the state. And so the rough number that most folks who've been talking about that have thrown out there is 1,000 teachers. We get to hire 1,000 additional classroom teachers around the state. So to give every one of the current 42,000 teachers a $5,000 pay raise and hire 1,000 additional teachers at what would then be a higher average salary scale of roughly $49,000 a year would cost about $284 million. We have outlined on the back side of this page what we would suggest are $617 million, so over twice that number, in either wasteful or non-essential or, at the end of the day, unnecessary state government spending that doesn't hurt, making the changes on the back side of this page doesn't hurt the ability of the state of Oklahoma to provide what most folks consider to be the core services: education, roads, bridges, and infrastructure, public safety, the safety net for the truly less fortunate. But when, you know, I mean, and part of, I think, what this stems from is something that Scott Meacham and others have talked about in the past. When oil's at $100 a barrel, you can afford to do stuff that you can't always afford to do when oil's below $50 a barrel, which it may be for a while. We don't know. Nobody knows for sure. Only the Saudi princes across the pond can really answer that question for us, and they're not here right now. So when we're looking at that picture as a state and we're saying what's really important, are higher teacher salaries really important, or is a $20 million Italian monastery in Tuscany more important? And $20 million, that's a neat number. Well, what does that equate to, though? That equates to a $5,000 salary increase for 4,000 Oklahoma teachers. When you look at reforms of Oklahoma's Medicaid system, that in other states not only brought costs down, but also have improved health outcomes for people on Medicaid in other states around the country. That's a lowball estimate savings of $100 million. That's $5,000 salary increases for 20,000 Oklahoma teachers. I think you can see how when you put some of these pieces together, you've got a patchwork where we can, in Oklahoma, provide teachers the $5,000 pay raise that most folks agree that they deserve, that they need. Because, I mean, for a family, you know, who's got kids in elementary school or middle school or junior high school or high school, they may have 1 or 2 teachers that's really making the difference in their kid's life. And that teacher may be wrestling with the decision of, I'm frustrated where I am. We hear that a lot from folks teaching in classrooms today for a variety of reasons. I'm frustrated where I am. Should I continue to go through with this, or should I go work at the bank in our town, maybe even make a little more money and not be stressed as much at the end of the day? So that doesn't just impact that teacher's family and their decisions. It impacts the families of all the kids who they're positively impacting right now. And that's an issue I think we all take extremely seriously, one that can and should be dealt with but that can and should be dealt with without raising Oklahoma's sales tax burden to the highest in the country, without doing it in an unconstitutional manner that sets bad precedents for other policies that may or may not be related going forward.